land, the animals, and the people. Welcome to the Wolf Connection Podcast.
It's been many years to get this individual up here, and now he's sitting across the table from me in our podcast studio. Doug Smith, welcome to Wolf Connection, my friend. How are you?
John, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
Yeah, no, this has been a great conversation back and forth for a couple months between you and me and getting this thing together. I mean, what's it been like sort of walking the land so far today and just seeing what we do here?
Well, I mean, what really struck me is I got my start with captive wolves, and you have captive wolves here. So it really was kind of a bookend experience today, looking at what you're doing, how you're trying to help educate about wolves, how you're trying to help individual wolves. That's very similar to where I got my start at Wolf Park in Indiana. Same kind of idea, but add in your outreach, add in these podcasts, this community of people you have listening, and it's quite remarkable to kind of finally come here in person. I've really learned a lot and had some eye-opening experiences.
I mean, just talk about because we didn't know this, I think, that you got your start at a captive facility. Just talk about that time at Wolf Park, Indiana, and how that put you on the trajectory that you were on for the next 30 plus years.
You know, I guess I believe in luck. Wolf Park was my lucky break, my foot in the door. I was a volunteer. I was in high school. I had no idea what it would lead to. I just was really interested in wolves. So it was kind of a one-off, and I grew up in Ohio, so Indiana was a short trip. And I went there and immersed myself in wolves for 6 weeks. I hand-reared wolf pups. My job title was wolf mother. And so, you know, I switched off with another woman who I haven't seen literally since then. I remember her name, Alice Evans. And, you know, I would sleep with them one night and you got no sleep at all. So then she would sleep with them the next night. And I got to know, let me see if I can remember their names, Sergei, Sasha, Mephisto, and Faust.
Wow.
Were their names, 2 black, 2 gray. And you know, that was my lucky break. And I worked with an ethologist, that's someone who studies animal behavior kind of purely, almost with no ecological slant to it. And, you know, my career went on to be mostly wolf ecology, yet I started in this world of trying to learn about the individual animal, their behavior. And, you know, that person's name was Eric Klinghammer. He was a German immigrant to the U.S., and he kept after me the rest of his life. Not that he gave me my first lucky break, but that the first thing you did with wolves was learn about their behavior. And he felt that was fundamental to learning about them in the wilds. And, you know, we stayed in touch throughout the rest of his life. And he always told me that, you know, behavior is most important. I gave you that, never forget that. And, you know, that was a perspective that I did keep with me. And, you know, at least in Yellowstone, a key part of it was individuals. And a lot of studying wildlife biology is looking at populations. And really, I think what made Yellowstone wolves special was we started from the individual and built to the population rather than the other way around.
Right.
And so to a degree, I owe that to Eric Klinghammer. And the last thing he did is he worked at Purdue University as a professor. So he knew Durward Allen, who started the Isle Royale Wolf Studies. He sat on Durward Allen's students' committees, most notably Rolf Peterson. And, you know, Eric called Rolf and said, I got a kid that's pretty good. You should hire him. And that literally, that made my life.
Yeah. I mean, we just when we were walking through and we were talking about all these different subjects, and you touched on what you just said before about bringing the individual to the population or learning about the individual first, and then talking about populations. And we touched on Jane Goodall, who recently passed, and she wrote a foreword for the Yellowstone Wolf book. And I asked you about the anthropomorphism, about looking at animals as sentient beings. How did that did that ever register with you as you were doing this work, when you started at Wolf Park and moving into Yellowstone and thinking about the individuals themselves as you walked through our sanctuary where we're talking about individual stories and individual tracks for all of our wolves that land here?
Yeah, no, John, there's a lot there with what you've just said. And first and foremost, wolves are like people and no wolf is like another. They're all individuals. And I got that today. We went through your entire facility today. I met several wolves, both in and out of their pens, and every single one was different. And their behavior and their approach to me varied. There was no generic wolf response.
Right.
And I think Jane Goodall is the one who brought that to the fore. I met Jane. I actually asked her to write the foreword to our Yellowstone Wolf book in person. And then we went on to communicate through email. And she's remarkable because almost every famous person you learn about and then meet does not live up to expectations. There's something about them that makes it better that you knew them from afar instead of up close. Jane Goodall was not that. She was graceful, kind, generous, intelligent, almost loving when I met her in San Francisco, California. And that was the way she was throughout all my interactions with her. And so she probably is one of the greatest conservationists of all time. And what she did is she took her study of chimps and kind of was groundbreaking in that she decided to name them. And I think her main point of that, and talking with her a little bit about it, not directly, was that helps people connect with nature.
Right.
If we're calling it, Wolf 221 versus, half black, and plus the visitors who came to Yellowstone named them anyway, even though the government deliberately and, talked about it, didn't want to do that. But the visitors did, and it allowed them to connect more with the wolves, which is a form of connection with nature. And Jane's the first one who did that, and I think got that right. And she was a pioneer in so many ways. I think we need to pick up where she left off on that kind of stuff, and that helps you learn about individuals. I mean, she studied chimps, which are basically a whisker different than humans, so it was easier to name them, because they're so much like us. It's not that much of a stretch to name a wolf too, and people remember it, and it's easier to remember their individual stories. And so I think she had it right. We should have followed her lead, learned from her. Every single wolf you introduced me to today had a name, not a number. And I think that's an important way in this day and age when we're losing so much. We got to bring people in, and that's a good way to do it.
Yeah, I talk about some of the experiences that you had just with some of them. I know Willow came over to you, which is some of our favorites, and then we had a totally different experience with the Nikumi, where you were. I could see your scientific brain observing and and looking and saying, "Oh, the skull, the skull formation and the tail and the coat, whatever." What was it like for you to be back inside of a captive facility and see these things for probably the first time in a while?
It is the first time in a while because I felt bad going in a little bit today because I looked at their body thinking where would be a good place to place a dart, and that's a horrible thought. But I chased hundreds of wolves in a helicopter, and you're always looking for a good shot. And, to be honest, I didn't have them close really until I'm on their backs on top of a helicopter. And here I was a few feet with them today. Some of the wolves came up to me, licked my hand. I scratched their throat. And it was surreal because I just didn't do that in Yellowstone, and watching their behavior up close, there's a lot of similarities, where I sat, some of them scent marked. They definitely sniffed all over it. I had to remember you had to ask me a couple times, take off the sunglasses, sit down. And the first thing Eric Klinger asked me to do was they had an accidental litter of pups in one of their pens at Wolf Park in Indiana, and we had to pull the pups from the parents. I can't remember really why when I was 18 years old, but Doug, stand tall, look big, look intimidating, and you had to remind me today, if you want this wolf to come up to you, don't do that. And they did. and some didn't. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't have either. But, those are just kind of experiences I haven't had very much recently because, if there's anything I would like to say I tried to do in my career, it was to be an advocate for wild wolves. And I really think that's what we're kind of missing sometimes with our recovery efforts. And these recovery efforts have spread. We've got Colorado coming online now, but we've got the Northern Rockies. Wolves have moved into Oregon and Washington and even California, where I sit today. The Southwest, of course, they've expanded, previously into Wisconsin and Michigan. And so these recovery efforts, are we keeping the soul of the wolf alive? And to me, that's a wild wolf. That's really what wolves want to be. And so that's what I've advocated for the hardest. And you see glimmers of that in your pens, Now I realize a big part of your mission here is giving these wolves and wolf dog hybrids places to come after bad situations, which is respecting these individual animal lives, which I think is a wonderful thing. So it's good to see that and remind me of that. But I've really been trying to be an advocate for these wild wolves, is what really one of the main goals of my career was.
Yeah, and you've done that in so many different ways. And because we touched on it briefly when we spoke with you the first time, because I think you were freshly retired at that point. It was very fresh in mind.
It was fresh.
It was, so there's a lot of, I would assume, adjustment happening there. As you look at retirement now, a few years in, how do you see that purpose going forward for yourself and looking at it and continuing the work that you did from the park?
John, that's a tough question, and in some ways I appreciate it, and in some ways I don't know how to answer it because you've delved so deeply into the wolf world. You guys got 250 podcasts. You've talked to everybody. You've read everything, and those are deep dives. And when I retired, I didn't quite know what I was going to do. Truly, I really dedicated my life to trying to help wolves, but it didn't take off that way. I'm like every other person. You start off doing something and you're just trying to get by. You're not sure why you're doing what you're doing. And my first love with wolves was just learning about them. I really loved that. I guess you could call it wolf science, although I do not consider myself the greatest scientist. I truly loved wolf research. I wanted to come at them from that angle. And that morphed into wolf management and wolf conservation, which is completely different.
Right.
Which is what I didn't start off working for the government. I had 3 wolf jobs before I landed in Yellowstone, and all 3 of those jobs were outside the government, most notably working on Isle Royale.
Right.
And the umbrella, institution was a university. And I loved that because it didn't really necessarily have a management purpose. It was just learning about wolves, and it was on Isle Royale, which is arguably as remote as any place in North America. Like in a lot of ways, I've been to Alaska over 20, 25 times. It seems more remote than Alaska.
Really?
And so you're just really out there in the wilderness with the wolves, and I love that more than anything else. And then I ended up in Yellowstone and working for the government, and that's a whole different ballgame. And you morph into management. And that leads to people management, both internally and externally, the visitors that come to the park. And then you become a voice for wolves. And I kind of backed into that. I didn't necessarily set out to do that. But the thing that took me, at least half my career in Yellowstone to realize is that Yellowstone is a stage like no place else. And, I was raised in the Midwest where we're not supposed to toot our own horn. You want to be in the back. You want to be quiet and draw no attention to yourself. But mid-career, I'm like, you got to use this Yellowstone stage somehow. And the way I tried to use it was to be a voice for wolves. So, I almost never turned down an opportunity to do an interview or give a talk. I always have liked to write. I don't know if I'm a good writer, but I tried to write about it. And so I kind of morphed more into someone who, advocate, voice for wolves, tried to help them when I really started off trying to be a wolf scientist. And I don't know if I achieved that. And then it ended. And it ended for various reasons, some of which are personal. And I kind of didn't know what to do with myself. And I've been retired almost exactly 3 years, and it's getting filled in. I wrote a book. I kind of pounded it out. It's a general book for the lay public. Nothing groundbreaking, but I tried to put a spin on it that's interesting and, dare I say it, entertaining. And some of it's my philosophical views about wolves. Other wolf biologists may disagree with it. I have been giving a lot of talks. I don't think talking is a skill that you should be proud of, but somehow I've ended up getting a lot of talk requests. So you got to embrace it because you can be a voice for wolves, and then I am, because I was asked to do it, and it's hard. Again, I don't like being in the forefront, pounding on the table, but I'm getting involved with wolf policy issues and wolf management debates and what we should do with them. And, I find if I show up, sometimes it can help. I don't like it. I testified twice in front of the Montana legislature last winter, and I hated it. It's stressful. You're going up against people that are in your face and aggressive and don't like you and are proposing actually in some ways ridiculous bills and policies. And you're like, really? And I have to go up there and talk against this stuff, which is common sense, not even a moderate position. So, I'm kind of inching along, and pretty soon it's a full life with wolves in a completely different way. Sorry for that download, but It's been a struggle.
I was going to say, it seems like there was not only fear, I want to say fear, there was reservation on your part just to be put in the situation we're in as you were working in Yellowstone and understanding the evolution of that position. And now as you're retiring, there's a different sort of evolution happening and finding a new pack role. And it, not to put the pun out there, but it seems like you're trying to fall or back into these pack roles that are just being pushed on you in a natural way to be who you are,
Well, I've always tried to be who I am.
Yeah.
I've always tried. I have critics. Everybody's got critics. A lot of people would say, I didn't do that very well. But I think one thing I did try and do in Yellowstone, I did a lot of interviews and I gave a lot of talks. It was always to be who I was, And what got hard about that is, and I don't, everyone likes bashing the government. I don't want to do that. We need government. And government sometimes is the best agent for conservation. And pretty much all of wolf recovery has been government-led. The government does the best they can, but we had internal battles. And one thing I always struggled with is, the interview, when I first started off working in Yellowstone with wolves, it was just call public affairs and make sure the interview's okay to then do your thing. As time went by, it got more restrictive. They wanted to know what the questions were, what my answers were. And sometimes interviews were scuttled, and I think wolves, you need to push back. There's so much misinformation out there that you need to tell the truth always. And sometimes the truth hurts and sometimes the truth is bad, but the truth always wins out. Americans, everybody, they sniff out this inauthenticity. And I think being able to have that platform that Yellowstone gives you is a key part of working for government. You've got to use your platforms to speak out about things about that other people don't. And that got harder and harder to do as time went by. And that was frustrating for me. And all I was trying to do the whole way through was be myself.
Right.
And I got in trouble, actually, for that. And that was hard.
And you say that, and it's so parallel to what we have with the kids here who come here who just want to be themselves, and they look at these wolves and wolf dogs, and they are nothing but their individual selves, and they make no apologies for it. So it's when we're put in positions as humans with directives and instructions that we need to do, and we can't be our full authentic self, that's something that obviously butts up against what you were just saying. Is I want to be my true, authentic Doug Smith self, and someone's not allowing me to do that. And that's a rough place to be in certain places.
It is. And, coming here to Wolf Connection, has opened my eyes in a number of ways towards what you guys are trying to do. And it helped me in the same way. I got attached to wolves. I can't remember when that eureka moment came, but I was a young teenager, and wolves were something for me to, one reason I loved them was because of everything you just said, is that, they're symbols of the wild. They were a creature that kind of understood you. You could put your faith and trust in them. And, it dawned on me today with the tour that you guys did walking around, that's what you're trying to do with these kids too. And, wolves are not dogs, despite their very similar genetic makeup. They've got that feeling and look to them that isn't dog. And I would call it the touch of the wild. And when you see that up close, it really pierces your soul. And I can see how a kid who's having a hard time would pick up on that. And, my life has been wild wolves. And you've used that wildness in a creative way in a captive setting here for people, a lot of kids. And I think that's the magic of wolves. And that's what I'm worried about us losing as a society. In a lot of ways, we're bringing wolves back on our terms. They've got to succumb to us in order to live on the landscape. What do I mean by that? If there's a problem, we kill them. And I think that there's more there wolves can offer us if we let them be wolves. And I know this is a captive facility and I'm probably taking this too far, but man, the wariness those wolves showed me today in the pen is not dog at all, man. And that's why we need dogs, man. I got a dog. I love them. But we can't lose that aspect of a wolf that dogs don't have, and we got to be able to say it's out there in the wilderness, okay? And even though I can't touch it and own it and hold it, it's there and we need to allow it to be there, even though I don't gain from it right away. I mean, everybody nowadays needs to gain from something. Having wolves living out there in the wild separate from us is what we need to allow them to do that.
And you speak to this because there is a wild and instinctual part of ourselves as human beings, as Homo sapiens, that, as you alluded to, and I believe it as well, is that we're losing that connection or that balance with the natural spaces and losing our understanding that we are, and I really have attached myself to Aldo Leopold, like reading his book finally that I got from Stephen, that we are a cog in the wheel. We are not the one turning the wheel. Like, we're not the dominant factor. We have to find ourselves and reattach ourselves into the balance of the whole thing. Otherwise, we've lost, the whole reason for being at this point. And I hope I think you resonate with that in that way, right?
Oh, I completely resonate with it. I mean, Aldo Leopold takes nature to another level. I mean, the guy was a wildlife biologist, but wrote like a poet. I mean, the artistry in his writing is virtually untouchable, but it was all about animals.
Right.
And it was, 50, 75 years ago, and no one could kind of touch that. But I do think that is fundamentally where we're at. We live in a world of parking lots and plazas, and we're losing that connection with nature. Life would be horribly boring if we didn't have nature. So I'm not just saying that it wants to help our lives, but we need to be more a part of it. And what kind of drives me nuts is we have all these policies and politicians and parties who are anti-environment. I almost said environmental. That's a dirty word nowadays, but let's just call it nature. But yet, who do you know that doesn't, when they tell you about their vacation, doesn't go to someplace in the environment? Even if it's, the South Sea Islands with palm trees and beaches and, blue water, it's still the environment. And when you look at family pictures, they're always outside. This connection to nature that we innately have, we take for granted. We can't do that anymore because nature's on the run now. And, what we're sitting here, and I'm here visiting you guys in Southern California, looking at wolves. Wolves are that kind of red flag to say, because really what they need most is space. They can live alongside people. That's a misconception that was prevalent 50 years ago, that they're wilderness species. They're really not. They were just only left in wilderness because we had killed them every place else. They can actually live right next door to us if we let them, but they still can't and don't do well there, and they need lots of space. So they're a red flag to us to say, hold on, time out, stop the human takeover of the planet. That's a great warning for us to stop what we're doing and stay connected to nature. Yeah, I'm not overloading wolves. I know everybody overloads them with symbolism and savior status. Scientists get mad about that. Wolves as saviors, they're going to clean up all the ecosystems and make them natural again. But they're a red flag, simply. Okay, throw that all stuff out. They're a red flag for humans to say stop.
With that, you basically led into my next thing I wanted to bring up is what are the lessons you have taken from wolves, both I think in the captive facility that you were in Indiana and the work there that you're integrating into this, because it really seems that you've become one with, the wolf way of life in the way, just by all the things you're saying. Like, how are you integrating those lessons you've learned from them, just watching them, observing and being a part of their society for decades?
Well, I shouldn't start the answer to that question with this response, but, and I do believe what you said about being yourself, your authentic self. And, a student here wrote on a rock here at the sanctuary, be yourself. But Mark Twain one time said, sometimes the worst advice you can give anybody is to be yourself. And I've always found that can be true. So I try and be like a wolf because they have great qualities for living. They don't worry about, wolves have a pretty high mortality rate in the wild. If they've got an 80% chance of living for the next year, that's pretty good. If you're a human and you have a 20% chance of mortality over the next year, I would be worried about any day could be my last day. That doesn't impact wolves. They're family oriented. They're very social. They're very good parents. They're very good nonverbal communicators. I get criticized a lot for talking too much and talking too loud. Wolves are great examples for us to live by. So that's one of the things I got out of working with them all those years. They're truly their authentic selves. Human nature, I debate this a lot with friends. Is it really good or bad? Wolves don't have that problem. They just go forth in the world and be themselves all the time. They're great examples for us. I think that's what I've learned most from wolves. Also, I would argue, and this gets into the debates that sometimes I grow weary from, wolves are ecosystem saviors, but it is still important to have a complete ecosystem. And I don't mean that's just wolves, but wolves are important to it. So all this trophic cascades research and, food web research that people talk about and kind of, celebrate wolves' role in that. Okay, maybe that's overstated, but you still need them out there. Right. They just need to be in it. So I've learned one thing personally, wolves are good role models, and another thing ecologically, and that ecosystems are more biodiverse. I hesitate to use the word healthier, probably better structured when you have top-level carnivores like wolves present. And so those are two, I would say, fundamental things in life. How you comport yourself and what's the world like you live in. And wolves are in the center of both of those things. So they've been a real anchor for me in my life. I know that sounds, flowery and rosy, but everybody needs anchors nowadays to get us through. the world is so complicated now. Those simple things, like just having wolves out there, have really helped me. I can think that I could help others, whether they're captive or wild, they still have that look. So thank you for introducing so many people. And it's not just kids, it's people who've run across trouble with the law that you're bringing here. You get wolves to look at you, and that means something. And it's not the same look as a dog.
Yeah.
It's a different look. And you're providing that for people here. And I forget that because I've worked mostly with wild wolves. So that's a wonderful thing you guys have done here at Wolf Connection.
The Wolf Connection podcast is now sponsored by our new partner, Jacques-Marie Mage. This LA-based brand is known for their limited edition, handcrafted eyewear and luxury goods, but also for their stewardship program, which supports various nonprofits and individuals who are working to protect a future for wild wolves.
So taking those lessons from wolves, do you feel like you've taken lessons from other wildlife? Because bears or elk or cougar, anything like that in the same way that has that potency that you just described that wolves do, because you were head of those other projects as well. Birds also. I mean, is there anything else that is potent as that?
No, there's not. I mean, I'm trying to keep this wolf-centric because you folks here are just, Wolf Grand Central Station. But, I'm one of those freaky, nerdy, weird people that just get off on nature. And it was kind of my upbringing, and I was lucky to grow up in nature. My dad had a camp, in northeastern Ohio, which isn't really rugged wild country at all, but I thought it was as a kid. And that connected me to nature. Like, I love your name, Wolf Connection, and I've been connected to nature for a long time. And in some ways, I am a bird nerd. There's no question about it. And it was cool being here. I didn't bring my binoculars because I didn't think we'd be at a nature reserve. I just thought it'd be a bunch of, concrete and fences and wolves. And, it's a natural environment here. And I'm looking at the birds, pulled my eyes away from the wolves. And, their stories are every bit as good as the wolves. I look at some of these small neotropical migrants, and neotropical migrants are birds that go to Central and South America in the winter. And, they're 5-6 inches long, and they fly across the Gulf of Mexico from the Yucatan Peninsula to the Gulf Coast of the United States, 800 miles. And it's a epic journey that many of them die doing, yet they don't flinch doing it. And they hit the Gulf Coast, refuel, and they go to the boreal forests of Canada or Alaska.
Wow. And
breed and then fly back, And some of these shorebirds launch from Alaska and fly to New Zealand. 9-10 day flights, nonstop flying. Now, if that doesn't turn you on, and if that doesn't amaze you and make you think that they're better than you, humans think we're the pinnacle, we're the best. Nothing is more intelligent, more advanced, more creative. Look at the society and technology we've created. I would argue that that's better, that's braver. And these young birds do it without their parents. Wow. And I could go on. I did latch on to wolves first, but I've been living with birds since a small boy, just aware of them. And now I can't think of anything more enjoyable than a walk in nature on an early morning during spring migration, or in retirement. I've discovered fall migration out watching birds, because you can do it when you only have an hour, and when you want to see a wolf, it's an expedition.
Right.
And people have criticized me for my entire career because before Yellowstone, it was a wilderness trip to see a wolf. You had to go for a week or two in northern Canada or Alaska to find a wolf, or Isle Royale. And now you can go to Yellowstone Drive-In, see a wolf, and drive out in the same day. Okay, great, but that's not necessarily bad. birds are everywhere all the time. They're a great way to connect with nature. I didn't know you'd give me that opening, John, and I'm taking it and running with it.
You can thank, because Steven's good at that, of finding stuff. And this is why, I thank you for the words about the podcast that we've fostered here, and like the kind words that you said. It's really been a passion of both of ours to bring this stuff, like these conversations, to the forefront. I mean, these are the pinnacle of our, creative process, to be able to bring these conversations with you and others to the forefront about what we're missing in the natural world and missing in the environment and the ecology and everything else that's going on. It's just, this is what gets us, the fire in our bellies going, is being able to express these thoughts and learn different things and know and gain knowledge that we didn't have prior. So it's just wonderful to keep continuing having these conversations. I mean, post your biologist career in the wildlife space, because you've been in the wild your entire life. I mean, let's face it, from a kid, you're connected to nature. How do you connect with it now? Because you were able to connect with it as a young boy with the birds, going to that captive facility, and then you were off on a career. So now that you are private citizen Doug Smith, what are the things that bring you that joy in nature, that allow you to be who you are in the natural setting that we have all around us?
I mean, wow, bang, you really dive deep and ask these tough questions. I think the point I'm at now is I want to give back to nature. Nature's given me so much. It really has been my root system through my whole life, and I can't overstate that. A parallel world for me in the wolf world was I really did a lot of canoe trips in the most remote areas I could find. Started in the North Woods, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, graduated to Ontario, then went to Alaska, and then kind of lately have settled on northern Canada. And the whole time I was pursuing that as hard as I was pursuing trying to learn about wolves, because I was really trying to seek nature in its most pristine form. We don't have pristine anymore with things like climate change. It's touching everything. It's kind of the invisible hand that's just slipping through it all. And that was heartbreaking for me, because I was really going to the edges of civilization, looking for the pristine, as much as from I want to see it and learn about it, as a soul-saving kind of experience. And so studying wolves overlaid with that perfectly, because, I would see wolves in the Yukon Territory, in Nunavut, Northwest Territories, and, in these remote regions. And so it was kind of seeing it fully together. And, that kept me sane, really. And the thing that I worry about in society today is I try and stay out of social media. I try and stay out of this news information blitz, because nature, it's not that. It's quiet, and it's introspective, and it's alone. And I'm not saying you can't go there with friends and family, but it's just, it's not that. And that's truly what got me through, like, mental health almost.
Right.
That nature was this pulse of the world that was strong, real, and steady. And it gave me that sanity. And so now I want to give back. The thing I ask the most of myself, the voice in the back of your head, is, what do I do now? And you can't rest without thinking, one reason I'm here doing this podcast is, this is maybe shameless to say, I want people to listen to it. And so in their own way, they do something too, to give back to this thing that really our life depends on. Farming, these bumper stickers, thank a farmer for your life, or whatever it says, is essentially our connection to nature. you know? And, you know, we take that several levels out to get to things like wolves and songbirds flying across the Gulf of Mexico, but they're all connected, and we don't get that anymore. We're losing that. And so that's where I want to work. I want to help. And, you know, the hardest part about studying wolves is you want to save them all, but you can't. So I'm trying to come at this from a reasonable, moderate, compromised position. And believe me, I've gotten people criticizing for me. I've gotten the hate mail and the emails and the people at conferences whispering in your ear telling you that you've let them down because I'm taking a moderate position. And now I'm not in government anymore. And so how can I influence people? Maybe I can't. Let's be humble about it.
Right.
But I got to take a stab at it. I got to try. And so in my own little way, without going nuts, because if you think you're going to change the world overnight, you really will go
happen.
crazy.
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, as our shirts that we have on, you know, protect what connects us, because everything we do is connected to the earth, to the natural world.
I wish more people would understand that.
Yeah. It's like you said, it's the thing that we've lost over time and and it's not just, it's been a slow burn. And I think where we're at now, we need to revisit those things and get back into, just like we did today, just walking the land and seeing the different things, like you pointing out the birds, looking at the creek, all these different things and saying, oh, wow, like there are ways to reconnect in this way. You've been collaborating for decades with wolves and working alongside them. You know, what do you want, if they could hear you, what would you want them to know?
I got your back to the best of my ability.
If you think about legacy and wisdom and eldership, what is that? How do you want the work, the body of work that Doug Smith has done and is not done yet with, but that body of work to be remembered as?
I try not to think about that. What would a wolf do? What would a warbler do flying across the Gulf of Mexico? They just do the best they can and let the chips fall where they may. I just try and do the best I can. And, you know, I wanted to retire and just kind of fade away and not do much. And I can't. I couldn't. But you just got to do it in your own personal way. I don't like thinking about legacy or making a mark or stacking up more publications or writing more books or doing movies or being on TV. What has driven me is trying to help them. And I think by now in this podcast, you know who them are.
Yeah.
And, you know, they don't have a voice. And I do. And some people tell me that I talk too much and talk too loud. But that's what I try and do with that is give them a voice. And the reason I do that is because I have spent many moments alone with them in the wild, or call it nature. And they're magical. They are wonderful. And it inspires me and it keeps me going. And so I thank them for that. And I owe them for that. And they expect nothing from me. And so what they gave me was a gift that, And so that weighs on you and you want to give back. And it's not necessarily to them individually for all those times they gave me, but in some kind of way, I want to give back. And I don't care what that means to humanity. It means something to them.
If you have a final piece of wisdom in the culmination of all of your experiences from the wild with these wolves, with these animals, with this environment, anybody who's watching this or listening to this, what would you want to share with them?
Life's a struggle. And you read all these human stories, and that's what it is. It's a struggle. And nature's a lifeline. And so we got to throw a line back to it. And so don't give up. And I've said that before. People have heard me say that before. But that's what I came up with when I was under pressure one time talking to a school group. And, some young grade school kid said, "What have you learned from a wolf?" And that's never give up. And so what I never want to give up is trying to help nature. And I think if we all throw in and do that together, even, I never think I do enough. If everybody just throws in together and does what they can, I think we can turn this around. And I guess that's the last thing I want to say.
When you hear the word wolf, what's the thing that comes to your mind?
I get a shot of dopamine. It's a wonderful creature, and they live in fantastic places. And in a lot of ways, they've given me the life I have. And it's not because it was my job and employment. We all need money to live. But it was that kind of spiritual, soul-making, true, authentic life that they represent. And I want everybody to have that. But I most of all want them to be able to continue doing that for themselves.
Thank you for being your true, authentic self. The world is a better place with you in it. Thank you, Doug.
I don't know what to say. I appreciate the invitation to be here. I've learned a great deal from you guys today. Thank you.
Yeah. Listen to his words, folks. Boy, how's to all out there? We'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody.
Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer. Thank you for listening.